Chapter 11 continued. Sir Happy looked intently at Horace and asked, "What did the gentleman look like?" I knew where he was going with the question, hoping to tie this man with the market attack. "He was very finely dressed with a cane and top hat. He had brown hair and was approximately 14 bricks tall. I know because I counted them while he stood there. Oh, and he was very young looking for a man with a cane." "Anything else?" Sir Happy inquired. "He had a limp, too. His one leg didn't work properly. I have 2 uncles and 3 cousins who were born with the same problem." I raised my eyebrows at this statement, as if anticipating my hidden thoughts. Horace looked at me and said, "I come from a very large family. I have 22 brothers and sisters, not to mention all of my aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, and nephews." "I can only imagine the holiday gatherings," I muttered under my breath. It was Sir Happy's turn to control the urge to laugh. I believe he might have poked me had I been standing a bit closer to him. The idea of so many pigeons gathered together in one place, all cooing and bobbing, seemed incredibly comical. As I mused over the possibilities, I inadvertently let out a chuckle. Our feathered companion eyed me suspiciously, saying, "Do you find my family amusing?" My carelessness and behavior had offended the dear bird, and I was very much afraid my momentary lapse would cause Horace to end his narrative before we had gained all the information we needed from him. In an effort to maintain the momentum of our conversation, I stifled my merriment and explained to Horace my chortle occurred not because of the content of his statements, but on account of the new information we had just gained. I assured him his communication would indeed bring us closer to catching the killer, which should, I explained, make him feel more at ease. Horace seemed content enough with my excuse, and so it was we set our attentions back on the subject of the murder and the enigmatic gentleman. Sir Happy took the lead in regaining the earlier subject by saying, "Let me review the information we have covered so far. We have a young man dressed in fine clothes, carrying a cane, who secretly watches the attack on young Miss Penny and her father. Through a series of events, we discover he is intimately connected with our killer canine, most likely having trained the dog himself in the art of attack. This same young man notices Mr. McGibbons and appears to initiate action against him, but is stopped by the impending arrival of the police. The gentleman subsequently hobbles away down some dark alley, never to be seen again. Is that the gist of it, Mr. Horace?" "Yes," Horace replied. "You have covered all the highlights of what I said perfectly." Sir Happy stared at the ground for a long while, replaying in his mind the newly discovered events of Miss Penny's attack. "What I still fail to grasp," he said finally, "is why McGibbons was murdered in such a vicious and calculated manner. It just simply does not add up." In perfect self-important style, I chimed in and stated the obvious. "It is simple, old man," I said. "McGibbons saw more than he should have, and was murdered to keep this knowledge from being shared with the authorities. What do you say to that, Sir Happy?" "I would say, Marmee, old boy, you are shamefully out of touch with the reality of the situation and have not spent enough time reasoning your way through the facts before making a judgment on the case. First of all, McGibbons was the only witness to the presence of the young man, aside from our friend Mr. Horace. The authorities were already on their way when McGibbons and the gentleman made eye contact, and the latter ran away. So McGibbons would have had ample opportunity to share whatever information he chose to with the police. Killing McGibbons after the fact would have very little benefit for the murderer, because McGibbons would have little pertinent information to offer in identifying the man beyond his physical description,
which would be generic at best. If I am correct about the location of each man involved, the distance between McGibbons and the gentleman was not an easy one, and would have made it difficult to determine the details about the man. You know the routine: hair color, height, approximate age, etc., etc. I doubt McGibbons would have thought to calculate the height of the stranger based on the number of bricks it took to make up his height. Horace seemed especially pleased to have Sir Happy bestow intellectual wherewithal on him, just because he had used the height of the bricks to gauge the height of the man. "What about the limp?" I asked defensively. "For all we know," he said, "the limp was an affectation implemented specifically to throw investigators off the track where McGibbons to turn him in. If we assume McGibbons was unacquainted with the man, the distance between the two of them would hardly have given either one of them an advantage in distinguishing specific features about the other, which might facilitate identification later on, especially not on a crowded London street. Even if McGibbons recognized the young man, either through some mutual acquaintance or based on an earlier unrelated run-in with the gentleman, when it came down to it, it would be the word of a commoner against the word of a wealthy, well-respected gentleman. Who do you think the authorities would believe? In their minds, the young man would have nothing to gain from creating panic and inflicting harm upon such a wide range of victims. The dog's owner would have plausible deniability. Consider this as well. If evidence were produced proving the young man's presence at the attack of Miss Penny, he could easily claim he was trying to stop the dog during the attack and fled from the scene out of fear and uncertainty. The appearance of the situation would be completely on his side, giving him little reason to fear McGibbons and his perception of the event. So again, I say McGibbons' murder makes no sense to me in light of these facts. There must be more to the situation than meets the eye. I wanted more than anything to have something smart and important to say in return for my admonition, but I had nothing whatsoever to add, and it annoyed me. I knew my friend was right, because he was always right, but at the moment I wanted him to be just a tiny bit wrong. Unfortunately, one cannot be wrong when one is right, so I had to accept his current explanation.
Ahem!
Horace interjected. Sir Happy and I both turned to face Horace, who seemed most eager to speak.
Sir Happy is right,
Horace said. It was bad enough to know my friend was correct in his evaluation, but I found myself perfectly peeved to be so instructed by a pigeon. For just a moment I narrowed my eyes at the bird, being in no mood to be ganged up on by Sir Happy and his pinioned admirer.
"Begging your pardon, Mr. Marmee,"
Horace said, clearing his throat after his voice broke with the last word.
"What I mean is there is more to the situation. I have not finished telling you everything."
My interest was piqued, as was Sir Happy's, so putting my annoyance aside, I directed our feather companion to explain.
"After the stranger disappeared,"
Horace continued,
"this Mr. McGibbon started laughing to himself and mumbling things under his breath. I thought he had been scared crazy by the face-off, and I was ready to fly away to hide, when he suddenly turned to me and addressed me like we were friends. He said, 'Old bird, I think our ship has finally come in. We'll make a fortune off of Mr. B after seeing what we did today. Yes, sir, we will make a fortune.' I have no idea who this Mr. B was, but it seemed as though McGibbons was planning on selling his information to someone. I stayed pretty close to him for the next little while, up until the day he was murdered. It was the day I went into hiding, and I've been hiding out ever since."
Sir Happy became very excited again. "Of course!" he exclaimed with an exuberant bark. He looked to me as though he expected a specific response. When it was not received, he crinkled his brow at me. "Whatever is the matter, Marmee?" Sir Happy asked. I would have thought you would have been more elated by this new discovery. By this point, my annoyance had returned, and unfortunately, so had my sarcasm. Perhaps my lack of enthusiasm is a result of my being shamefully out of touch with the reality of the situation, not having spent enough time thinking about matters before passing judgment. Sir Happy looked truly dejected by my echoing his earlier statement about me. You are sore at me, and I would say rightly so. I can be a bit rough around the edges when my mind is focused on a detail. I am sorry, Mommy. You deserved better, and I should have given you more credit. I forget sometimes you cannot see into my mind. There have been so many occasions where it felt as though you were reading my thoughts. I guess I took it for granted we would always be in tune to the same ideas. Forgive me, my friend. Seeing such a heart of sincere repentance, I could not help but let go of my anger. I had my moments as well, and I could not fault him for believing I understood things exactly as he did all the time. It was actually a tremendous compliment on his part to believe I processed information in the same efficient manner he did. I had to admit to myself my grasp of details and my ability to process those details in rapid succession, concluding with a clear understanding of their significance, was not equal to my friend's. I chose to forgive him for his momentary quip and allow him to explain the importance of what we just heard. This new information proves McGibbons either knew the young man or knew someone close to him. He was planning on blackmailing this Mr. B or using him to blackmail someone else. It is very likely why he was killed. Sir Happy turned his attentions back to Horace. Horace, you said you stayed close to McGibbons up until the day he was murdered. Did you by any chance witness the exchange between McGibbons and a well-dressed gentleman?
In fact, I did, but I had never seen him before.
Tell me this, Sir Happy continued. Were you in the market when the attack occurred? And if so, did you recognize the canine?
It was the same one as it had attacked the little girl,
Horace replied. Turning to me, Sir Happy said, What this tells us, Mommy, is the gentleman in the market was very likely either our mysterious Mr. B or someone close to the young man responsible for the attack on Miss Penny. We are one step closer to solving this case. Tell me, Horace, Sir Happy said, turning back to the bird. In the time you were following McGibbons, do you remember him visiting a very fine home, perhaps even that of our elusive Mr. B?
No, I'm afraid to say McGibbons stuck pretty much to the scariest parts of town. He never ventured into the finer sections, not even to sell his wares.
Horace paused for a moment, obviously trying to collect his thoughts. There was a bit of a letdown with the pigeon's resounding no.
He did go to a fight one evening, however.
What magic there is in words sometimes. For the moment Horace announced it, Sir Happy again became very excited. He was barely able to contain himself as he asked, What sort of a fight?
A dog fight, I believe,
was Horace's prompt reply. Oh, Horace, you have no idea how helpful you have been, said Sir Happy. Might you remember the location of the fight, perhaps a street name or even an address? The particulars are the utmost importance. To our great joy, Horace had retained all of the essentials of location and time, giving us exactly what we needed to pursue the leads in that direction. As we took our leave from our new friend, we discovered his true identity.
Incidentally,
Horace interjected as Sir Happy and I were just turning to leave,
I thought with all I have shared with you today, I should give you my true name.
Sir Happy and I were most interested in this innocuous bit of news, having been given a false name upon our initial introduction. One might imagine our surprise when we discovered the pigeon's name really was Horace.
Forgive me, Horace explained, but when I first introduced myself, I could think of no other name to offer. I panicked and gave you my real name, hoping you would think it was made up. I guess I'm not very good at intrigue.
Sir Happy and I gave a hearty laugh, assuring our friend his ploy worked. I rather thought it was ingenious myself, and said as much to our feathered companion. He was most grateful for the compliment, citing his usual tendency toward absent-mindedness. Again we offered our farewells and turned to leave. This time Sir Happy turned back and offered a bit of advice to Horace in regards to his personal safety. Horace, one thing of importance, stay clear of the area where the dog fight occurred. I know you might be tempted to investigate things further, but it might be best not to draw attention to yourself. You never know if one or more of the fighters saw you with McGibbons. No need to remind the scoundrel of your existence. Don't worry, Mommy and I will catch these murderers. Horace seemed comforted by the assurance and promised to avoid any of the areas he visited while following McGibbons until such time as he knew the villains were safely behind bars. It had been a long day, so Sir Happy and I made our way home as quickly as we could. My paws were positively aching by the time we arrived at Hanover Place. To our great delight, a letter from Stephen was waiting for us, having arrived earlier in the day by post. Sir Happy was most eager to hear word of his Stephen, as he was missing him terribly. I was anxious as well to discover when we might expect him home. The correspondence read as follows. Dear friends, I have arrived safely at the Pierpont residence, thanks to the care of my hired carriage. The Pierpont estate is very large, so much so I doubt I would be able to walk the whole of it in a single day. My reception by the staff was very cordial, but as of yet, I have no idea why I was called here. I found it odd to discover the Pierponts were not present at the home upon my arrival, having been removed from the estate for the last few weeks and relocated to their residence in the city. When I pressed one of the servants, I was told the master of the house and his sons were expected within the next day or so. The house staff was instructed to make my stay as comfortable as possible until the master's arrival. No one in the house seems to know why I was called here. I have no intention of staying more than a week's time, regardless of the so-called emergency. I think I shall lose my patience with this family if I am forced to wait for them beyond tomorrow. Charles, there is a matter of some importance which I would like you to take care of for me. It is in regards to the kind soul who was my carriage driver. During the time I spent with the man, I had the good fortune of getting to know him better. As it turns out, due to the health of his young son, he is in need of a position outside of the city, one in a country setting where his boy will have access to fresh air. His son is grievously ill and is not expected to recover without such a change in his environment. The gentleman I am referring to is a man of good character, and I have decided to help him and his family. His name is Robert Dibdins, and I have hired him to care for the cottage and the grounds at the edge of my country estate. I have already given him letters of reference to introduce him to the local families in the Shire, and I have paid him his first week's wages to help him and his family move. I have also given him the money to buy the medicine his son needs, and have written a letter of credit to Dr. Falkland to cover any additional medicine which might be needed. If you would see to it that Mr. Dibdins receives the keys to the cottage stashed within the upper drawer of my bureau, I would greatly appreciate it. I think you will like the man as much as I do. Perhaps with Robert and his family so close to the estate, we should take a few weeks off this summer and spend some time in the country. Please give my affections to Sir Happy. It is rather lonely in this big house without him. I do not think I shall sleep properly here without him burrowed in the covers. A man needs his dog, and I feel rather lost without mine. Make sure he has an extra blanket at night. You know how cold he gets. and give him an extra long ear scratching in my absence. I know the separation must be hard on him as well. Give Mr. Marmee a good scratch as well. I've grown rather fond of our marmalade-coloured friend, and will be most glad to see him and my little boy Sir Happy upon my return. Incidentally, please tell dear Amelia I miss her cooking. She has spoiled me immensely, and I find it difficult to appreciate any food not made by her hand. Take care, my friends. I shall see you soon, but not nearly as soon as I would like. With deepest regards, Stephen. It was reassuring to know Stephen was well and missed us all. Amelia was especially tickled to be so highly praised for her abilities in the kitchen. She made note immediately upon completion of Charles's reading the letter that such a large estate would naturally have hired a superior cook to tend to the needs of the family. "Do you realize what this implies, my dear?" said Amelia to her husband. "By default, I might be one of the best cooks in the country. I must practice more diligently if I am to perfect my craft." Amelia quickly scuttled off to the kitchen to create some marvelous culinary delight for our supper. Charles tried to temper her fervor by reminding her it was just one household, but Amelia was already lost to the preparations she was making in the kitchen. Sir Happy, for his part, took the letter well, considering the fact he would have at least a week of separation to look forward to. But then again, the anticipation of reunion can be magical, and such a feeling was what I wished for my friend. I elected not to broach the subject of the separation, deciding instead to focus on the phenomenal circumstances of Robert Dibdin's being Stephen's carriage driver. "It appears, Sir Happy," I began, "as though our wish to help Lady Jasmine and her family is coming true. I never could have anticipated the luck of having Robert Dibdins and our very own Stephen meet without our maneuvering events to bring their acquaintance about. I could not be more pleased by the situation. How delighted the family must be this night to know their precious boy will be saved. I'm quite certain Lady Jasmine herself will have much to celebrate. And to think, we will have several weeks over the summer months to get to know them all better." I looked to my friend, fully expecting him to be as actively pleased as I was, considering our earlier conversation on the matter. I was a little surprised to see him so distracted. I stared at him for a moment, waiting for him to realize I had finished speaking. "Sorry, Mommy," Sir Happy said, breaking from his internal preoccupation enough to offer me a weak smile. "Please forgive my absent-mindedness. It is wonderful news about the Dibdins family. It does not surprise me in the least to discover my Stephen was instantly moved to help the family. My heart is relieved to know the boy will be able to recover. We both were extremely concerned on his behalf. I was just focused on the part of the letter which referenced the Pierreponts. I find myself feeling a bit disturbed and extremely uneasy, to be honest, and I am not sure why." I had to agree wholeheartedly in regard to the oddity of the Pierreponts' behavior. "It is rather discourteous," I began, "to send for a professional such as your Stephen, insinuating with very strong language there's a matter of great importance which must be attended to, only to have the professional arrive in great haste and discover the very people who sent for him are not present. I cannot imagine the situation is exceedingly grave if the family has decided to linger in London and make their house guest wait upon them to arrive. Most peculiar, if you ask me." Said Sir Happy very thoughtfully. "It is very peculiar indeed. What I find even more disconcerting is the fact that the staff is either ignorant of the purpose behind having my Stephen sent for, or they are unwilling to divulge the reason to my Stephen before the master arrives. I cannot imagine a household where the servants remained ignorant of the goings-on of the family whom they serve. When you think about it, It is the business of the servants to know every particular when possible. They see and hear everything. So, what is the big secret? I don't know, old friend. I truly do not know, was all I could reply. There was a sense of uneasiness about the situation Stephen was in, but there was little which could be done about it that night. My body needed sustenance and rest. Since these were two issues I could address, I decided to focus my energies on satisfying them both. Supper took a long time in coming because Amelia was making an especially complicated meal. I tried, rather unsuccessfully, to grab a few kipper snacks to tide me over, but was shooed from the kitchen. "Oh, no, you don't, little man," said the crazed cook. "You'll not be ruining this meal. You will wait just like everyone else. Out with you now." It was very undignified to be chased away in such a way. When I walked into the reading room to groom myself by the fire, Charles began to laugh. "Don't feel bad, Mr. Marmee," he said. "My own wife kicked me out of the kitchen when I tried to swipe a muffin from the warmer. She would have smacked my hand had she been fast enough to catch me. I suppose we men shall have to band together and bravely battle our starvation as we wait for our meal." His good humor about the situation lightened my heart as well, and so we spent the rest of the evening in good company, waiting for the grand creation to arrive. When Amelia finally emerged from the kitchen, she looked a bit haggard, which was not by any means her usual appearance. "It is ready, my loves," she announced breathlessly. "I have made puffed pastry with a savory poultry and thyme gravy, an herbed lamb roast with fresh mint sauce, and for dessert, a raspberry tart with a lemon glaze. Of course, there's fresh baked bread, and sweetened creamed for anyone who is interested." Flour and bits of herb clung to her apron and dusted her face, where she had reached up to brush back her hair. It was obvious that each smudge was a testimony to her labors of love, and it was with full hearts and hungry bellies that we sat down to our sumptuous feast. If there had been any doubt before as to Amelia's culinary abilities, one bite of her evening creation put any questions to rest in all of our minds. Very little was said through the whole of supper, each of us being too busy filling our mouths with one scrumptious bite after another. Amelia sat back in satisfaction, knowing her title of best cook in the country was safe, at least as far as the three souls were concerned who currently were benefiting from her gifts. After our delightful repast, we retired to the study to spend a quiet evening digesting our meal and the remains of the day. Upon eating what I believed to be nearly twice my own weight in heavenly food, I became incredibly tired. Looking around the room, I discovered I was not alone. Sir Happy was dozing peacefully next to Charles, whose head occasionally bobbed forward as he passed into blissful unconsciousness, only to jerk violently back the moment he realized he was falling asleep. It was quickly decided we all would go to bed and finish any intended discussions in the morning. Of course, it has always been advisable to allow one's supper a few hours of digestion time before lying down for the night, but considering the mood of the evening and my great fear Charles would gravely injure his neck and back from all of his violent jerks, I did not protest when the suggestion for sleep was made. I very quickly nabbed the most comfortable spot in front of the fire, and within no time found myself drifting into the dark oblivion of sleep. Unfortunately for me, my dreams were not restful, being filled instead with nightmarish visions of our murderous canine attacking and terrorizing everyone I loved and cared for. I will not remain too long upon the details of those terrible apparitions, but suffice it to say, I celebrated the coming of dawn, knowing with its arrival came a rescue from my dreams. I felt no better in the morning than I had the moment I laid down the night before, and I was determined in the future, upon consuming such a rich and filling meal, I would avoid lying down before the food had had a chance to digest completely.